Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world has to overcome not only the damage done to our economies and our societies by COVID-19, it also has to confront the repercussions of a dangerous clash between major global powers. History is truly at a turning point.
Setback in the quest to understand coronavirus after a researcher is shot and killed.
I have decided that the United States of America will renounce the use of any form of deadly biological weapons.
Get your shots, get your boosters.
Doctors baffled by increase in sudden adult death syndrome.
We destroyed all of our seed stocks. We destroyed all of our production material at Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And we completely got out of the biological warfare business.
Subject today concerns CIA's involvement in the development of bacteriological warfare materials with the Army's biological laboratory at Fort Detrick. In the course of the investigation, CIA's laboratory storage facilities were searched, and about 11 grams, a little less than half an ounce, of shellfish toxin and 8 milligrams of cobra venom were discovered in a little-used, vaulted storeroom in an agency building.
I emailed the FBI in June of 2021. I'd been working on understanding what COVID was, and that even though this thing has been labeled a respiratory disease in ARDS, we are not seeing that that's what the profile of the disease is. We are seeing it as an envenomation.
They wrote back to him?
Yeah, they wrote back a letter that said, received, period, thank you, period. He got a 3-word letter back. For years, he trains FBI and CIA agents. That's his job in the prevention of mass killings worldwide. And he specializes in bioweaponry.
Various dissemination devices, such as a fountain pen dart launcher and an Edgen head bolt designed to release when heat, appeared to be peculiarly suited for clandestine use.
The first drug approved by the FDA to treat COVID-19 patients.
You know that the people or the politicians, once you get a power, you will never relinquish it.
Even the most warlike of peoples have recognized in the name of humanity some limitations on the savagery of warfare.
The snake in the Garden of Eden is representative of all those things that lurk when you think you know what you're doing. And when you think you know what you're doing, you've carved out this little Eden, this little paradise in which you're operating. But there's always something that's lurking, and that's all the things you're not paying attention to. Well, that's the snake. In Genesis, of course, interacting with the snake means the end of paradise, just like it does in life.
I said since May 2020, remdesivir will result with at least 30% deaths of everyone who receives that drug in a hospital for 5 to 10 days. I got Thomas Renz to pull the CMS data. You know, for the state of New York, I decided to run it in New York. I wanted to know Medicare-aged patients. What's the percentage of death of those who received remdesivir for its 5-day protocol? 26.9% of them died.
The reason why we're making the announcement now is something that I believe people don't fully appreciate. Whenever you have clear-cut evidence that a drug works, you have an ethical obligation to immediately let the people who are in the placebo group know so that they could have access. And all of the other trials that are taking place now have a new standard of care.
So you have kidney failure, liver failure, now heart failure being caused by remdesivir, published to do so. 2 months later, your NIH, the FDA, still sits back and goes, this is the only approved drug for hospitalized COVID-19 patients. You know what's more disgusting? January 21st of this year, the FDA extended an emergency use authorization and said there's now only one authorized medication that can be pumped into the veins of all newborns in this country to 18-year-old pediatric age-ranged children, starting with 7-pound newborns. Guess what the only authorized drug to treat COVID-19 children is now?
The FDA gave full approval to the drug remdesivir for children as young as 28 days old. And I know Brian Artis well, and I adore him. And the stuff that he broke on remdesivir was life-changing for me as a doctor, and his story with his father-in-law. And he brought that to the entire medical world around the globe. Wow. Nobody knew that.
The FDA said in a press release that it had concluded remdesivir may be effective to treat the disease, and the potential benefits outweigh the risks.
I was asking for help from doctors who are now being silent. For 4 months, I was wanting to vet the information I had about the venom aspect. And then after 4 months, knowing two things were happening at the same time in our world, the FDA was pushing an emergency use authorization in January of this year to now let remdesivir get pumped into the veins of babies, for crying out loud, and then moving it into nursing homes. I didn't like that. That's a threat to innocent people. And then the fact the FDA right now is actually considering to vote to give the mRNA shots to 6-month-old to 4-year-olds. That stuff and the hesitation of doctors I was trying to vet this information with and get the shots and get remdesivir tested in labs. Their hesitation and the inability to deliver goods to me wasn't going to stop me from it forcing the issue on the world.
One of the things that led me to go look for venom in the first place was it didn't make sense to me biologically that a clean virus, and I call it clean because it's not very cytotoxic, coronavirus. It's pretty clean in terms of going in and looks for a place to basically bond. In this case, with this coronavirus, it's the ACE receptor. And then it does its thing. It extracts the DNA and the resources, and it makes more of itself. It's not necessarily going to cause that much cellular damage around it. Whereas this thing's doing the opposite. This thing is really destructive in the body, which is why I separated out what I've been sort of referring to now as the tank and the gunner on top.
You know what's interesting? That 10 years ago, I had researched something that I brought to Dr. Artis's attention just a few days ago, and he was blown away because it linked a program called MK Ultra that was part of the CIA's program. Not sure if you're familiar with it. Are you familiar with the heart attack gun that was created?
No, actually I'm not. No, tell me about it.
The woman that was tasked with it, she was only 18 at the time. Her name is Mary Embry. This is all public. This was a congressional hearing. It's not me and a conspiracy website. It's a congressional hearing where they show the gun and they explain how it was developed, and it was using a shellfish venom that was frozen in ice, and they could shoot it about 100 meters.
Also, I had to find, one time they wanted me to find out if there was such a thing as a poison that was undetectable, especially one that seemed to mimic a heart attack, that would kill someone, but it would appear that they had a heart attack. I did find such a thing.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman, and a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
The poison was frozen into some sort of dart, and then it was shot at very high speed into the person. So when it reached the person, it would melt inside them, and the only thing would be like one little tiny red dot on their body, which was hard to detect. There wouldn't be a needle left or anything like that in the person.
But also the toxin itself would not appear in the autopsy?
Yes, so that there was no way of perceiving that the target was hit.
What this topic highlights, and I think what the bigger picture of why the public should be interested in it, is like all things technology, right? At this accelerated pace, that the technology has moved so quickly now, and there aren't very many regulations around things like venom that, you know, the ability to now synthesize peptides, and peptides are just short chain proteins, and the ability to make venom is now an easy task for people to be able to do.
My name is Zoltán Takás. I'm a biomedical scientist. I follow my childhood passion. Our work is based on the genetic blueprint of the toxins, either the DNA or the RNA sequence, because we can actually, using bioinformatics, we can design the library so we know every single toxin variants what we create in a library which holds, let's say, 2 million toxins. We are exactly know what goes into that library, and then we can put these DNA pieces artificially into bacteria, and the bacteria will make as much toxins as we wish.
I mean, you can't connect the gun to the shooter and hold them accountable.
The president currently is chasing ghost guns, right? But like ghost guns are so old school because you're thinking about gunpowder. Like, how long has gunpowder been around? And like, we're not even like, as human beings, like that is so primitive as a weapon. Well, now, if you need a piece of plastic or even metal replaced out of a machine, and you had the specs on the past, you can just make one, right? You can just 3D print it. So that's where we are biologically. You can literally instruct, whether it's E. coli or yeast, and you can instruct them through various processes to say, make this protein for me.
So today, about 20 different medications are derived from animal venom toxins, and they're treating like heart attack, high blood pressure, heart failure, thrombosis, diabetes, chronic pain. It's actually quite interesting that how many different types of diseases could be potentially treated by animal venoms. And the answer for this, and the reason for this, is because toxins have been evolved for millions of years to immobilize and kill prey and predator.
Animals such like snakes, Gila monsters, centipedes, and even snails are probably not what you pictured in your drug factory. But some of these venomous creatures have produced blockbuster drugs to treat diabetes, hypertension, and chronic pain. So I like to describe genomics as sort of this marriage between evolution and technology. By investigating the venom of these predatory animals, combined with modern-day techniques like RNA and DNA sequencing, we've sort of propelled the discovery of novel compounds that can be used in drug development. The snail has a venom, which I like to describe kind of like a cluster bomb. It's not one peptide, but it's several peptides that have evolved over time to basically shut down the function of that fish. And these are peptides that have evolved to hit their specific targets. So to give you a summary of what we've done so far, we use nature to sort of learn the lesson of which of these snails are producing venomous peptides that are manipulating signals in cells. We investigate the venomous compounds, various ones, and we try to identify the peptides for which there is a biological assay that targets cancer cells. So nature has the answers. We just have to trust in what I like to call the killer snails. Thank you very much.
I really did love these first documents you shared about the 19 different types of venom that were discovered in COVID-19 patients, which is interesting because that's not COVID-19 vaccine injury patients, which we'd expect to see after what we've discovered now. That would be the most classic case because it's going directly into the bloodstream. That one makes more sense to me, but somehow it's getting in their body from another means. Or that gun is being used. That's a variable that we have to consider.
Yes, it's been amazing it's been amazing to watch how people are starting to put information together I didn't even know about. I mean, there's things I did not know about. The fact that 50 years ago almost, the CIA has been weaponizing shellfish venom in little secret operations that they could shoot with ice darts into people where they couldn't even perceive the actual dart and could trigger a heart attack with an isolated venom from a shellfish. I didn't know that till you brought that up yesterday. However, I do know that since 1956, there's a guy named Dr. Stanley Cohen. Dr. Stanley Cohen was able to identify there was this thing called nerve growth factor that when you actually injected a petri dish with a developing chicken embryo, if you just put snake venom in the petri dish with it, there was this unseen nerve growth factor that would accelerate neurological tissue to replicate faster or grow faster. And he called it nerve growth factor. And then he discovered something called EGF, epidermal growth factor. This guy, Stanley Cohen, won a Nobel Prize, was awarded a awarded Nobel Prize in 1986.
Anything that disturbed the timing of a developmental process was worthy of study. If you put in a lysosomal inhibitor, such as ammonia or chloroquine, it did not affect the binding, but it blocked the degradation.
And then you move into the 70s, where the CIA is using venom as a weapon with frozen water that you just told me about yesterday.
Yeah, and we watched the videos of the actual congressional hearings.
We did.
That showed between the year 1952 and 1975, when it was disclosed, this had been happening between those years and been developed and then disclosed by a gentleman, Mr. Colby, that was at the church committee hearing, and it was all laid out in plain sight for the public because it was so secretive and stealth-like that finally some truth was being told, which gave us the ability to actually validate the usage of these technologies in secrecy, that it has been disclosed in the public domain outside of conspiracies. If someone wants to try to brand something like that, you have to understand this technology exists.
It's been around for 50 years. I just learned from you. I had 50 years. You don't think they've learned how to use and isolate venom peptides from animals or components of venom as a weapon? The CIA was doing it back in the 70s. What's even more incredible is that not only are they using just this shellfish toxin from the 70s as a weapon to stop the hearts of a human, and it was undetectable by science once you did an autopsy. That was incredible to hear them talk about that in the congressional hearing. That was in 75. You're in now 2020. Inside of these individuals, all of which tested positive for COVID-19, every single tissue sample evaluated, urine, feces, and blood. When they evaluated all of it, they not only found shellfish neurotoxin, which is what the CIA was using, they actually found 20 different venom peptides that are found in venomous snakes.
And doctor, we're hearing about this outbreak being linked to snakes. How so?
So yeah, Dave, Chinese scientists have analyzed the genetic sequence of the virus, and it really appears that snakes like the Chinese krait and the Chinese cobra may be the source of the deadly coronavirus. They concluded this after identifying that the 2019 NCOV was a mix or recombination of two coronaviruses. One was known to infect bats, but the other had origin that was unknown. After considering other animal hosts, scientists concluded that it may have come from snakes.
New research from the University of Arizona suggests we're closer to getting an answer. As Team 12's Jess Winters explains, it seems to boil down to an enzyme that's also found in rattlesnake venom.
And again, this is a neurotoxin similar to neurotoxins, this enzyme similar to what you find in rattlesnake venom?
Yeah, it's the active ingredient of most neurotoxins in rattlesnake and other venoms. Now, it's not exactly the same enzyme. It's a humanized form of the enzyme, but the homology, the sequence homology, the similarities are striking. They're both the same size within their active sites. They do the same thing, and they belong in exactly the same family of rattlesnake venom, phospholipase A2.
All new at 10, snakes starting to play a big role in COVID-19 research. Scientists from the U of A discovering an enzyme similar to one found in snake venom could be driving COVID deaths.
Researchers explain that current clinical trials on snake bites are helping in those efforts. They can possibly repurpose some of the treatments being tested. We asked a rattlesnake expert for his take on this.
Something that is almost as universally loathed as rattlesnakes, it seems fitting and interesting and ironic that the venom that they have and rattlesnakes might be a key to getting out of this whole situation.
My thesis looked at chaos theory from mathematics, and people are familiar with terms like the butterfly effect, that are like that basically a small change can have a large effect. And so when you have a look at venom, for example, venom in mathematics is what's known as a strange attractor. It is, it's very small for what it is, but it's an extremely powerful attractor as a catalyst, as a process that starts a rapid redox reaction that ultimately changes most of the enzymes in whatever organism has been attacked and puts that organism into a death spiral. It's like a pathway that starts with this tiny amount of substance that changes. I mean, in the case of an envenomation of a human being, the tiniest amount of venom, of all venom, can have this catastrophic effect leading towards death. If you think about a tiny little spider, or most people are unfamiliar that with Lyme disease, the tick is in the spider family, and the tick has venom in its saliva. And so if you think about how small that is and how small that bite is, and yet look what happens to people that have Lyme disease, and look how long it can last in their body. The key aspects of venom are that venom fits into a category of this tiny substance, right, that has huge potential to change up a system.
And you know, the stand that you're making is really honoring people like Frank Olson, Eric Olson's father, who was an MK Ultra scientist that was killed, thrown out of a window. You know, Reagan settled with $850,000 to the family. This was all proven. He was drugged by the CIA, flew out of a window. He was not willing to keep the secrets, and it was all connected to biological warfare. Yeah, this has been on plaguing people's consciences.
I want to ask this to Carrie. How do they misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there?
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. No, the results, the interpretation of it. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. But it's not an estimation. No, it's a really quantitative thing. It tells you something about nature and about what's there, but it allows you to take a very minuscule amount of anything and make it measurable, and then talk about it in meetings and stuff like it is important. See, that's not a misuse. That's just sort of a misinterpretation. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what it is. But it's not. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that.
It's interesting here. It talks about the nicotinic receptors are the main receptors at the glandular synapses. Nicotinic receptors are also found in the brain.
And that's what the researchers in France said, that the crate and king cobra spike protein venom they found, those target nicotinic receptors. And then they went like this. If these venoms attack the nicotinic receptors, then they hypothesized that maybe this is why smokers aren't showing up in hospitals sick with COVID.
I mean, it's a very interesting set of circumstances here. You would never think that smoking could be good for anything. But here we are with apparent evidence that suggests there's a possibility, however tenuous, that nicotine might be some kind of shield.
A study from doctors at a major French hospital found everyday smokers are much less likely to develop serious COVID-19 symptoms. France then banned online sales of nicotine products ahead of an expected surge in demand.
At first, experts studying COVID-19 thought smoking was a major risk factor, but now they're not so sure.
Data collected by French scientists suggests smokers are less likely to catch the coronavirus. The experts we talked to said this is not the case.
Then they hypothesized that maybe this is why smokers aren't showing up in hospitals sick with COVID. Maybe there's a protective mechanism to nicotine. Then they asked the world to do studies with nicotine for COVID. And our FDA said, And Fauci all went in the news and said,
These studies are sponsored by companies that sell tobacco. And the World Health Organization has issued a clear warning: do not fall for such studies.
Not smoking or vaping could save your life. And that is especially true when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic.
And another systematic review of evidence from China found the opposite, that smoking worsened COVID symptoms.
the observation was less than 5% of all hospitalized people around the world were smokers. And that was odd to all of those observing that demographic. They all said it should be the opposite. It should be 95% of smokers are susceptible to this respiratory illness. It doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to them either.
Okay, so you'll find this really interesting. You read this out.
Conotoxins have potential as biological weapons. The direct chemical synthesis would more likely be found in clandestine laboratory than the farming of cone snails. Most conotoxins are small peptides with 10 to 30 amino acids, which make them relatively easy to manufacture using direct chemical synthesis. As discussed above, much research is being done with conotoxins. The supplies in laboratories could be diverted to terrorists. Wow, so this could be aerosolized. That's the first thing I learned. Potential methods of using conotoxins in terrorism include contamination of food sources or aerial dispersal in a concentration population area. The most likely method of dispersal would be as an aerosol. Information on the inhalation effects of conotoxins is not available in the public domain. Yeah, and that actually goes along with what Dr. Tal Braun says. Dr. Tal Braun says conotoxin snails, they're using that to even ferment or produce venom of snakes. And you can aerosolize these venoms. That's what he keeps saying.
Wow, exactly. Yeah, and they're saying that this is such a big issue that this article, which has nothing to do with vaccines or COVID or anything like this, and this is from like 2012.
2012. And this is amazing. What I just mentioned it's amazing. This is what they found in that Italy study when they were evaluating COVID-19 patients who were positive for COVID-19 against those who did not test positive. They found 15 of these cono snail toxins in the COVID-19 patients. How did they get there? These are marine snails. How'd they get there?
Yeah. Exactly. What would you say if somebody said, oh, well, the reason why these things were probably in these people was because a lot of medications are made using venoms from these snails and from snakes, and so this is the reason probably why these COVID-19 patients had this in them? What would you say to that?
Then I would say, did you know you had venom from snails in your body? I mean, it doesn't matter. You've been lied to. No one knew this stuff. No one actually knew this. It's kind of like what people said initially when I brought up the Italy study. They were like, well, is the COVID-19 group that tested positive for these 36 animal venoms, were they vaccinated and the other group wasn't? And I went like this. What? Wait a minute. Are you suggesting that you think that these venoms might be in the vaccine? That's what you're saying? And that's the difference. That's even more disturbing.
Exactly.
You think they're injecting people? It's this weird cognitive dissonance where you can throw out irrational thought all of a sudden to make this make sense. It doesn't make sense that there's a neurotoxic venom from a snail in the ocean that can be used as a bioweapon, now that you're learning, that I've since learned is mass manufactured in facilities since 1989, and the synthetic version of this alpha conotoxin, which is deadly, more deadly than a king cobra's venom. The synthetic version in factories is more deadly and as biologically active as the natural version. I'd be concerned about this. In fact, they just said this. They can give it to terrorists.
The ease with which a biological weapons program could be disguised within legitimate activities and the rapid advances in biological research make it very difficult to detect violations. We believe that a protocol would not be able to keep pace with the rapidly changing nature of the biological weapons threat.
Signs and symptoms of exposure include faintness, ptosis, which is drooping eyelids, which is one of the COVID-19 symptoms, poor coordination, absent gag reflex, areflexia, which is loss of the ability to have reflexes, paresthesia, urinary retention, diplopia, double vision, blurred vision, speech difficulties, dysphagia, the difficulty of swallowing, weakness, nausea, generalized numbness, and respiratory arrest. The above toxidrome results from the interactions of a number of conotoxins rather than a single conotoxin.
That's interesting, right?
Well, that's interesting because I just showed you a toxidrome of a whole bunch of conotoxins in COVID-19 patients' poop, urine, and blood.
This is it right here, right?
Yeah, there's actually 15 different conotoxins that was found in the blood, urine, and feces of only the COVID-19 positive group. And this was collected and presented for peer review June of 2020, way before the vaccines ever came out. They found in the PCR positive COVID-19 patients 15 conotoxins.
This next story is so unbelievable, we didn't think it could possibly be true. But after receiving thousands of records and declassified reports from the Army, it's confirmed that during the Cold War, the United States military conducted secret tests on unsuspecting people in the city of St. Louis.
This study was secretive for a reason. They didn't have volunteers stepping up and saying, yeah, I'll breathe zinc cadmium sulfide with radioactive particles.
These Army archive pictures show how the tests were done in Corpus Christi, Texas in the 1960s. In Texas, planes were used to drop the chemical, but in St. Louis, the Army placed chemical sprayers on buildings and station wagons. City officials were kept in the dark about the tests. The Cold War cover story was that the Army was testing smoke screens to protect cities from a Russian attack. The truth, according to Martino Taylor, was much more sinister.
It's pretty shocking. The level of duplicity and secrecy. Clearly, they went to great lengths to deceive people.
By making hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests, she uncovered once classified documents that confirmed the spraying of zinc cadmium sulfide.
The greatest concentration of this compound was sprayed near the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex just south of downtown St. Louis. It was home to 10,000 low-income people, and an estimated 70% were under the age of 12.
We want to make very sure that nothing went on that would harm anyone and that all the facts are out on the table.
The Army always insisted the chemical compound was safe. Martino Taylor believes documents prove otherwise.
So this was in violation of all medical ethics, all international codes, and the military's own policy at that time. There's a lot of evidence that indicates that people in St. Louis, in the city, particularly in minority communities, were subjected to military tests that was connected to a larger radiological weapons development and testing project.
In 1972, after years of crime, poverty, and decline, the government destroyed the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex.
Going back to your point about how it would be done, is that once you've got venom in circulation, venom would be able to be transported the same way as a spitting cobra uses it in a salivary bubble, and it would be spat out, right? It could also just free float in the air because it's charged. So, the basic science of Brownian motion is that particles that are charged stay up in the air. You could absolutely add this to the water if somebody chose to do it. The difference maybe between the way Dr. Ardis and I were thinking through this is that I do believe that the initial attacks included a viral vector, SARS-CoV-1, which was a bat coronavirus with the spike protein, the new developed spike protein attached to SARS-CoV-1, and now gets called SARS-CoV-2 with an adapted gain-of-function spike protein. And then your venom then replicates. So the machinery to get this out into the air, into the water, into the food, onto someone's hands, onto someone's clothing. It's the human body that's the manufacturer of that venom.
Here's how it works. This is the virus. These are called spike proteins. Scientists have isolated the genetic code for those proteins, a set of instructions that are put into the vaccine so your body knows how to make them. Your immune system won't make an actual virus particle, but it will make copies of the angry red spike protein.
then you don't need the virus anymore, because then you start vaccinating people and you're putting the venom, and then they're telling the public that they're going to be making the spike proteins. So if you understand then that the spike proteins have venom on it, then what they've told the public is that for a certain amount of time, if you get an mRNA vaccine, for example, that your body is going to be producing the spike proteins, and therefore your human body is making venom that you're shedding to the rest of the world.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans. Right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
Animal viruses that only occur in animals, and they increase their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's send Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
You have a look at this paper I found from 1977 that spells out how they took a coronavirus and they successfully got a lectin, a form of venom, to stick on that coronavirus. And so, that to me is like, I shouldn't be trying to explain that to the public. The venom specialists need to be able to do this, and they need to do the right thing. And unfortunately, they are very connected to the pharmaceutical industry, and it's their bread and butter and their grants and their labs. And so I'm not sure that they're going to speak up. It's even more complicated for them than it would be for somebody who works for a vaccine developer.
Time for Health Watch and the heated debate over childhood vaccines and whether they cause autism. Yesterday, a respected British medical journal retracted a study that said the MMR vaccine may trigger autism.
That follows last week's ruling by Britain's medical regulator that Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the study's main author, behaved unethically with callous disregard for the children involved.
The allegations against me and against my colleagues are both unfounded and unjust. I repeat, unfounded and unjust.
But you have been discredited by some, or at least there's been an attempt to discredit you. And you also have a case pending, or a case about you in the British courts.
Cheryl, here's the deal. If you get involved in this kind of thing, then the first way of dealing with people who dissent from things like safety of drugs or vaccines is to isolate them and to discredit them and to make them an example to other doctors, not even to get involved in this in the first place. Let me quote you from the Vioxx trial in Australia that has just come out. Fascinating, there was an exchange of internal emails at Merck about how they dealt with doctors who dissented from the use of Vioxx, said it wasn't safe. It talked about how they would isolate them and discredit them. And the final one was the most telling of all. It said, we may have to seek them out and destroy them where they live.
So someone's been vaccinated. They're concerned about this. They believe it's venom or venom peptides. How do they counter this? How do they get it out?
Zinc and copper are destroyed from the cells of your body by what's called metalloproteinases in venom. The co-creators who are credited with the mRNA vaccine creation for COVID-19 Drew Weissman and Cataline Carrico. In their gene editing therapy research studies using mRNA since 2009, they have been solely funded by the NIAID Department of Anthony Fauci to do mRNA gene editing therapy. And when it describes the methodology for doing their studies, they describe that they use a substance called snake venom phosphodiesterase to cleave RNA so they can get the mRNA into the genetic material of either RNA or DNA. And if they were using snake venom phosphodiesterase to cleave and do gene editing therapy, and we know that these mRNA shots are designed to be gene editing therapy and to get your body to replicate new cells with the spike protein in it, yeah, I'm worried they're using snake venom phosphodiesterase. That's weird. When you buy or look up to purchase this stuff for research, snake venom phosphodiesterase, you can buy a bottle of it for $133. You know what it says as a descriptor? It says the person purchasing this needs to understand you cannot mix this snake venom substance, which cleaves or cuts genetic material in half to insert another gene to make a hybrid. You can't use this and mix it with glutathione, any cysteine products like N-acetylcysteine, and ascorbic acids like vitamin C.
These scientists have been grappling with how to stop sepsis, one of the most deadly complications of COVID-19.
He was very critically ill with multiple organ failure, and we were fearful that he wasn't going to make it.
They administered a dose of vitamin C 50 times greater than what's been tried before.
For a human, if you got this dose, it would be something like 5,000 oranges worth of vitamin C. The response was one of the most amazing things I've seen in my research career.
Right now, if you search vitamin C on the internet, search results analyzing its potential impact on the coronavirus show up immediately. A doctor in New York said he's seen promising response in patients receiving upwards of 6,000 milligrams per day.
One of the most exciting aspects of what we're seeing with vitamin C is the amount of time that it's able to reduce ventilator times for patients that are in the hospital.
In China, they're already proving the success rate with 10,000 to 20,000 milligrams a day for mild to moderate cases. And Dr. Mao reported that they had a patient declining in front of them. They gave him 50,000 milligrams in 4 hours, and they watched all of his respiratory sats and everything improve in front of their eyes.
If you can destroy snake venom phosphodiesterase or anything synthetically that looks like it that might be in these shots to do the gene therapy that those people, Drew Weissman and Cataline Carrico, have been using in labs for years, if you've got that inside of you and you want to stop the trauma, you might want to use something that's proven to inhibit it all that manufacturers say inhibits it and destroys it. I would be on glutathione or NAC that helps with making glutathione in a combination with selenium at 200 micrograms, and then I would absolutely be on vitamin C. If it was me and I had massive amount of symptoms post getting the shots, I would absolutely look to get IV infusions. Why would I not? Of glutathione and vitamin C. Get it in your blood as fast as you can. They injected it into your body, bypassing your gut to get it into your bloodstream as fast as they could. Why don't you use nutrients that are inhibitory to those substances?
The biggest thing that we have to do with a virus is shut the replication down. The best thing that does that is the natural immune system, and being healthy and having the right amount of hormones and vitamins and supplements in our body, and having a strong, robust immune system.
That's what I would do, a nutritional infusion center, or there are mobile units around the country that actually will come to your house and do infusions of glutathione, vitamin C, and I would look for that. And they're the experts in that. Remember, I'm the chiropractor researcher guy. Go consult with those guys, and I would ask them for the maximum safe dose daily. It's your life. That's what I would ask. What's the safe maximum dose? They're the experts, not me.
And here's how incredible our human body is, and this is why I think there's actually a spiritual path in all of this work for people, right? Besides all the metaphors with the serpent and the rest of it, the spiritual part is to be in love with how beautiful and intricate things work together and the relationships between things.
So now everyone around the world either gets to blindly ignore the warning and dismiss it outright, or do like a whole bunch of people around the world are doing right now, which is phenomenal. They are doing their own research. And they're trying to figure out the mystery, because for the first time for many of them, the insanity, the disgusting amount of injuries from these vaccines, the mysteries of the side effects and symptoms of COVID-19 finally makes sense to many as they sit and look at this. They're like, oh my God, it all makes sense. Yes, it does. Once you look at it for a minute, you'll start to see the reality that I see.
It's called the Fauci effect, which is sort of like, trust me, I don't get excited about that. I mean, it's nice, but I mean, it's what I symbolize, and what I symbolize in an era of the normalization of untruths and lies and all the things you're seeing going on in society from January 6th to everything else that goes on. People, the craving for consistency, for integrity, for truth, and for people caring about people.
Pope Francis says fake news is satanic. On Wednesday, the pontiff condemned, quote, snake tactics that create divisions to serve political and economic gains.
I remembered seeing that snake head viewing room of the Pope in the Vatican. It is shaped like a snake head. There's the eyes, there's the fangs, and I'll never forget seeing that, thinking, what is this? Like, what is this?
I mean, this is almost pretty much the first of its kind, the Abrahamic family house that is due to be constructed and finished this year to bring all the three major faiths together in one place and one place of worship.
The remedies have to be discussed through dialogue by the stakeholders of our global system, but I just see the need for such a dialogue, and I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
Their goal is to destroy all existing religions save theirs, all existing governments save theirs, and shackle the mob in a system of eternal oppressive debt chained to a computer for the rest of their life, in a propagandized world to make them believe that they are happy in this system.
And then the Blessed Mother is always, every statue, she's standing on the head of a serpent. And we know, you've heard the term, symbolism will be their downfall. Well, then you think about the snake in the Garden of Eden, and then you see the cover of Time magazine, 1999, where they show human DNA and they show a snake around it and the human genome.
With all the current issues on our agenda, we tend to forget that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, which accelerates global change in much more comprehensive and faster ways than the previous three revolutions.
Things are moving so fast, aren't they? We're living in incredible times. The one world government, the one world system, you can see even with all the sort of problems that are going on in the nations, it is developing. You can see the kind of strategy behind it to develop a one world system. And yeah, I mean, I know that there's total denial that that's the plan behind these buildings. And as you say, it's all about peace and so on. But it is so much a first step to what could be that one world religion.
We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected. In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever.
Now, do you think they're succeeding? Haven't I described to you just now exactly what is going on in the world today? Yes, they're succeeding. They're succeeding because the American people don't understand their enemy. They don't even know what's happening.
Nearly 800 athletes, young, fit people in the prime of life, falling down on the field. The average age of the players suffering cardiac arrest is just 23 years old.
We're going to be able to demonstrate how it is that these mRNA tech inserts itself into the ovaries of all females to lead to infertility. It disrupts the site. It's called syncytin-1. This is a gene that attaches the placenta to the uterus wall for a pregnant woman. This is what it destroys. The mRNA attacks that. It actually starts separating the placenta from the uterus. Then you start seeing massive amounts of miscarriages, which in multiple countries are now over 80% reported on pregnancies. They are lost after the mRNA injections.
I mean, that is a huge number right there. I mean, you want to talk about a eugenics program? I mean, there it is,
This is a
folks.
eugenics program.
In conclusion, and despite all the challenges, we have to uphold our responsibility, which we have towards the next generation, and which we can only fulfill through collaboration on a national and on a global level.
So it's time to admit that we have to go to war against COVID. Require vaccination universally. Have the military run it. If you don't want to get vaccinated, you better be ready to prove your conscientious objector status in court.
It is basically biological chip that it is in the tablet, and once you take the tablet and dissolves into your stomach, sends a signal that you took the tablet. So imagine the applications of that, compliance.